Hey everyone. One of you recently asked me how to better spot insecure people. So in this video I'll be sharing some tips that will hopefully help you do just that. But before I dive in, I do want to throw in a caveat here, which is that there aren't really any 100% foolproof ways of spotting insecure people, because human nature is just such a complex and nuanced thing that there's no way that something will apply 100% of the time to any given group of people. But you can still become quite accurate, probably within like the 90 percentiles, where you are better able to spot certain trends and behaviors that insecure people engage in. And I do want to say everybody on the planet is insecure to some extent. So in this video, I'm talking about people who are they haven't worked on their insecurities. So their insecurities are big enough that they're almost like red flags. So that's what we'll be discussing, how to spot those people. So let's jump right into the tips. The first one is the most important one, which is just take the time to learn about human psychology. That's like one of the best tips I could ever give you for understanding human behavior, because obviously that's what psychology deals with. And it'll help you understand the root causes for insecurities. It'll help you understand, well, one, the myriad amount of insecurities that exist in the world, but two, it just gives you a better understanding of why people develop these insecurities. So that way you can notice certain trends. You can become more accurate in telling whether or not someone may be insecure just from learning things about them, like their history, how things were when they were growing up. Childhood is huge because that's our developmental stages in life. So if somebody had certain factors impacting them as a child, you can likely accurately guess that that's going to affect them as an adult, because we're just not often taught how to deal with those insecurities while growing up. So most people have to deal with them once they're adults, if they even learn how to deal with them. And unfortunately, so many don't. But for instance, if someone as a kid was missing one parent, either their mother or their father, that will likely greatly impact them as an adult. And it'll affect them in different ways. For instance, that's why the term daddy issues is a thing, because there are usually certain trends that will play out if someone was missing their father. Likewise, if they're missing their mother, other trends could play out as well. So if you're talking to someone that you're interested in dating and you find out that they were raised by a single parent, that can usually give you some insight that they probably will have certain things affecting them. And I'm not saying that you should immediately disqualify them, but it can help you figure out that, hey, this is why they did X, Y, and Z while growing up, or why they haven't really had any long-term meaningful relationships, why they've dated around so much, things like that. It can just give you some insight into trends that may have played out in their life, and then you can just talk to them, learn more about them, and find out whether or not your assumptions are accurate. So learn as much as possible about human behavior, human psychology, should I say, because it'll just give you that insight that will help you make, for the most part, pretty accurate assumptions. But at the end of the day, always treat your assumptions as assumptions until you get them verified. Do not act like you immediately know the other person just because they tell you a few things about their history and you jump to conclusions. No, take the time to learn more about them and see whether or not your assumptions are accurate. You want to verify them. Don't treat them as the 100% truth until you actually get information to back them up. But anyway, another tip I want to share with you is just pay attention to the congruence between someone's words and their actions, or a lack of congruence, because insecure people quite often will have this incongruence between the two. That's where, for instance, maybe they tell you that they like watching other people succeed in life. But then if you pay attention to how they react in those moments where maybe a close friend of theirs gets like a promotion and a raise, you may notice that the insecure people isn't actually as happy as they said they would be. Maybe they're even frowning or looking a bit deep in thought. And that could be because now they're comparing themselves to their friend and coming up short, or they're wishing they were their friend, making that extra money, getting that promotion, and so on and so forth. So you just want to look for that incongruence between words and actions, where there's a disconnect between the two, because that can betray the insecure person's true intentions, and it can show you that, yeah, they've got some insecurities they're dealing with. Maybe they're not able to see other people succeed in life because they're still a bit too self-centered. So this is another thing that I want to mention. Actually, I've got a few questions here that may be helpful to ask yourself to get a better idea of whether or not someone is insecure. For instance, the first one, as I just went over, do they celebrate when people around them win? Because that can tell you whether or not this person is dealing with insecurities. The second one, do they seem to genuinely be kind and to genuinely care about others? And this will tie into the third question, which is, do they seem rather focused on themselves instead of others? Now, I want to stop here on this question for a moment because this is one of the kind of the biggest ways to tell whether or not someone's insecure. If they are very kind of focused on themselves, if they're very self-centered, if they're often talking about themselves or making things about themselves, that usually tells you whether or not someone's insecure, because the way insecurities kind of play out in people's lives, it makes them kind of go into some form of survival mode. And when we're in that survival mode, we become really self-centered. We just focus on ourselves completely. It makes it difficult to be kind to others. It makes it difficult to genuinely care about others because you're focused on yourself and your own survival. And that's something that insecurities tend to do to people. It makes them focus on themselves. So in that example where the insecure person doesn't like seeing other people win in life, it's because, they're going to compare themselves to the people they see succeeding. They're going to wish they were that person. It's going to trigger them in that regard. They're not going to genuinely be able to feel happy for the other person because they haven't worked on themselves enough to rise above the insecurities that are making them still compare themselves to other people. So you'll just be able to kind of notice that if someone is often making things about themselves, they're probably insecure to some degree, because that's something you can really only rise above if you start working on yourself, if you start focusing on your personal growth and choosing to become a better human. Then you can start rising above those insecurities that were making you act in those ways in the past. Like, that's a pretty big piece of evidence for whether or not someone is secure in themselves. If they don't really make things about themselves, they don't compare themselves to other people much, and they're just kind of chill and happy on their own because they have good self-esteem. They don't feel a need to compare themselves to others because they already know that they're whole and enough on their own. So there's no need for them to compare themselves to others. There's no need for them to make things about themselves. They just won't care. They'll be more interested in learning about other people because they're already going to know themselves well. So that's just some insights into secure people behavior. So if you spot that, it'll give you an idea that, hey, this person has probably worked on themselves. They're probably the opposite of insecure, and therefore they're someone you probably want to keep around you. And then I've got just one final tip or question to ask yourself here, which is the other person easily riled up? Are they hurt by what others say quite often? Are they easily offended? Are they just, in a way to sum it up, easily made emotional by others? Because that ties back to the whole making things about themselves type thing. This is where people will take things personally, even if it wasn't meant that way. Because remember, they're being a bit self-centered, so anything you say, they're going to interpret in terms of how it affects them. So that's where you can be making a lighthearted joke that has nothing to do with someone else, and they get offended over it because they're taking it personally. They think that you're talking about them when you're not. You're just making a joke. So if you ever notice someone being easily made emotional like that, getting easily riled up or offended, that person is pretty much insecure, because it's not a quality that secure people exhibit. They're just not going to take everything personally because they know that it's not, nor are they easily going to get offended because they've worked on themselves enough to rise above that as well. It's just not going to trip them up much, and they'll have a better sense of humor most likely because of the inner work that they've done. So there you go. That's very much the gist of what I have for you guys. Just a few tips to help you better spot insecure people. I mean, the list could go on for I can make a really long video, but at the end of the day, it would just be a bunch of examples of like human behavior. So you really are best off with just learning as much as you can about human psychology, so you can learn those trends in human behavior and learn about certain things that will affect someone's upbringing. So that way you know if an adult that you meet has a certain history, there may be certain insecurities that they're going to be carrying around on themselves. It won't be 100% accurate, but you probably can get within like the 90 percentiles, as I said earlier. It can give you insight, and then you'll just have to verify whether or not your assumptions are true. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys. So hopefully these tips help you better spot insecure people, and hopefully you can learn more about psychology so you can spot even more warning signs for them, and then that way you'll be able to better navigate life and just know who you should avoid. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like content like this, be sure to subscribe for more. Otherwise, the easiest way you can help me out is just throw a like and a comment on the video for the algorithm, and I will see you guys in the next video. Arrivederci!